Good afternoon, and welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. My name is Kat Killian. Glad to be here with you today. My apologies for being on a little bit late today. I had to wiggle around some appointments, so uh, this was the best I could do, the closest to the time that I had scheduled without making a video ahead of time. So I'm glad to be here with you live today. So today I'm going to talk about changing your mind. Um, Oftentimes we come across situations and we have decided, sometimes based on our biases, sometimes based on a careful evaluation of the facts as we know them, to make a decision or a determination of how something is or how something should be. There are many cases of this, and in a sense, this is what the scientific method is all about. That we take the information that we have and we make a decision about something. So, very interesting news came out this week and about the origins of COVID. So, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. When it first came out, there was a lot of blame on China, that it was released from this lab in Wuhan. And of course, the Chinese government was denying that. And um, the U.S. was pretty convinced that it had started in one of, they call them the wet markets, where they sell live animals, and that it had jumped species. And so it was kind of left at that. But the people, there were a number of people who said no, it was released from the lab. No, it was released from the lab. Now, several years later, um, we've come and an investigation was done, and a report was released by one of the departments. I forget which one. Maybe it was Commerce, um, but a department that normally doesn't investigate things like this. And their conclusion was that it was released from the lab, accidentally released from the lab in Wuhan. And then the FBI came on and said, yeah, that was probably what happened too. And so many of the people back in the day were who were uh, proposing that yes, it was released from the lab in Wuhan, or say, see, we were right. See, we were right. And here the thing was, is at the time we didn't have facts. Um, and knowing that we didn't have facts, most reasonable people said, well, it could have happened this way, it could have happened that way. And I kind of said, well, it's important to know, because I'm of the belief that if we know the origins of disasters and why things happen, we are better prepared to prevent them in the future. But in keeping an open mind about things and changing our mind, those people who were firm proponents of no, it was released from a wet market, um, now may have to actually change their mind. And since there is evidence, although I have not yet seen the evidence, I will admit that, um, that it was released from this lab in Wuhan. Um, I haven't seen that evidence, so I don't know how to evaluate it left. I personally was one of the people who said, well, I don't really know. And now here I want to give an idea of why we may have taken one point of view, or our government may have taken one point of view, and why there has been a shift in that view. And again, I'm casting doubt on this until I actually see evidence. So it could be either way. So the first thing is, when it first came out, we were trying to have good relationships with China. Um, our previous president was up and down on China. In some ways, he wanted to have good relations. In some ways, he was antagonistic. There was the whole um, tariffs and things like that, and it affected the trade balance. And of course, the world was thrown into a tizzy because of the pandemic. So many things were going on, and at the point, what was the point of assigning blame in that respect? We all knew the origins were China. We just didn't know, and I would say we probably still don't know until we actually see evidence, not just accounts of this evidence, that that it could have happened in the wet market or it could have happened in Wuhan. We don't know this. So, but we do know that the origins is it's pretty undisputed that it started in China. So, um, there were reasons for us not looking very closely and putting that evidence out. As we could see by the anti-Asian sentiment that erupted after that, that was one of the reasons. People will take prejudices, and our former president, I believe, didn't do any favors by calling it the China virus, um, even though we all know that that's where its origins were, um, because words have power and ideas have power in putting that in there like that. So we said that this was going on. All right. And we saw what happened as a result of that in our own country, of the violence against our Asian American population. So now move to today. And how have things changed in the world? How have things changed between U.S. and China relations? Right now, the pandemic has moved out of the pandemic phase, and we're still on caution for it, but obviously the virulence of the virus has decreased. There are still people who are in danger. There are still people who are suffering from the virus, but we're not having the multitudes of death that we had as a result of this virus now. So it's in a different phase. So that's one thing. The second thing is that look at what's happening on the world stage. Right now, China is posturing themselves to be of support, with Russia, supporting Russia, against Europe and the Americas, and NATO alliance in the Ukraine war. And so, if the U.S. is looking at that, well, now would be a perfect time to release that information that yes, indeed, it was in Wuhan that this had done. And so it's a way to, this is my opinion, based on what I know, to turn the world kind of against China. Well, you allowed this to be released into the world, and therefore, China's, the reasons that it happened, whether it was an accident or whether it was purposeful, again, we don't know. I did not see that in the report, on the report. um, it kind of creates an imbalance, a like, all right, we know China is not the most responsible country in the world, that they let this happen. And again, we don't know, but this could be a very good reason as to why that this report was released at this time. There are many secrets that the government keeps from us for various reasons. um, and again, you may think that's a good thing, you may not think that's a good thing, but the point here is in changing your mind, is that things can happen, and minds are changed and things are affected based on that. But by keeping an open mind, saying, well, as of now, I'm going to believe this. However, if presented with other evidence, I reserve the right to change my mind. It allows you to have an openness that you would otherwise not have if you came to a conclusion. It was definitely released. It was, malicious intent by China, or it was an accident and they're just irresponsible, or it came from a wet lab. It None of that really matters in terms of how we had to respond to COVID. And again, you could believe that the response was appropriate or not. That's not of debate. Today we're just talking about the origins of the virus and how keeping that open mind um, could indeed change our views. Again, our society, because of the way that we often think about things and how polarized things are, we don't allow for that openness. It's either or, yes or no, right or wrong, this or that. And there's often a vague area where we don't know the truth. We know our perceptions of truth. We know what we believe. We know the facts as we see them. I'll give you a great example. Last evening, if you got to see it, it was pretty fascinating. There was the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in the sky, and they looked like they were right next to each other. Jupiter, we know, is much larger. Venus, we know, is much closer. Venus, because of that, and because of Venus's atmosphere, it was a lot brighter. You'd think Jupiter would be brighter because it was smaller, but as we know, things further away appear to be smaller than they actually are, than things are close up. So, um, and they're, we're actually closer to Jupiter than Venus is. It was the way, it was our perception that they appeared in the sky. So we have a perception about things. Tonight, the perception will be different because they're traveling in different directions across the cosmos. And that reminds us is that things change. As our knowledge changes, or as time changes and that affects our knowledge, we need to change our mind, be open to changing our mind and coming to a different conclusion than we otherwise would when we have different perceptions, when we have different knowledge, when we have the effects of time um, to come in. And so when we allow our biases to become uh, the end of a story or the conclusion of, well, okay, I have all the facts I need. This is the truth as I know it, or this is the truth, as often is done when we are stuck in our biases. It's fine to say this is the truth as I know it. However, you can never end it just there. In order to break that bias, you have to be open to new facts. You have to be open to new perceptions. You can make a judgment in the way that you perceive something or believe something in that moment. But changing that perception, be it in scientific areas, be it in political truths, and in the case of Wuhan, I think that's what this is a political truth um, of why this information was released when it was released. And then there are other truths. A lot of people in spiritual circles, their beliefs change as their experience changes them. But there are some people who say, well, this is the truth, this is what I believe, and anybody who doesn't believe that is wrong. It doesn't allow for any growth. It doesn't allow for any experience. It does not allow for any changing of mind. So I think today's mini lesson, as it were, was more on the power of changing your mind, of being open to new facts, of being open to new experiences, of being open to new perceptions, in order to not become locked in a bias, in a biased opinion based on what your initial observation, reaction, belief may be. So that's all for today in Breaking the Lens of Bias. Thank you for tuning in. I hope to see you next week. And as always, please feel free to leave your comments on social media. I do go and look, and I will respond to any comments. And if there's any topics that you'd like to discuss, biases, any fallacies of thinking, um, any other topics, please feel free to put it in social, and I will respond and try and incorporate that on a future episode. Thanks again for tuning in. My name is Kat Kelly. I'll see you next time.